When Beatrice's wealthy grandfather died, her greedy relatives walked away with the huge estates, the vintage cars, and the offshore bank accounts. All they left her was a battered, seemingly worthless wooden desk. They laughed in her face, but that cruel laughter died the moment she found the hidden spring. The rain beat hard against the towering floor-to-ceiling windows of Harrison Sullivan's corner office in downtown Boston. It was a perfectly gloomy afternoon for reading a will, especially one that was about to break the Gallagher family apart forever. Beatrice Gallagher sat in the far corner of the large mahogany-paneled room, trying to make herself as small as possible. At 26, she was the youngest person in the room and the only child of Arthur Gallagher's late, estranged son. Unlike the others gathered around the huge conference table, Beatrice had not come today expecting a fortune. She was here out of deep, quiet respect for the only man who had ever made her feel like she belonged in this family, her grandfather, Arthur. Across from her sat her Aunt Marjorie Smay, a woman whose very presence seemed to pull all the warmth out of the room. Marjorie wore a tailored black Chanel suit that probably cost more than Beatrice, made in a year working at the local public library. Marjorie's son, Bradley, sat beside her, texting furiously on his phone and sometimes looking up just to smirk at Beatrice. He looked terribly annoyed that he had to pause his life just to inherit a fortune. To Marjorie's right sat Uncle Charles Gallagher, a corporate liquidator whose cold, calculating eyes were fixed on a leather-bound folder resting under the lawyer's hands. Charles had spent the last 10 years trying to get his father declared incompetent, so he could take over the Gallagher estate early. Arthur had fought him every step of the way until his heart finally gave out at the age of 89. If you want to know more, like this video now so it reaches more people. Harrison Sullivan, a lawyer with a voice like dry gravel, cleared his throat. We are gathered here to carry out the final wishes of Arthur William Gallagher. Arthur was a man of exact tastes and clear intentions. He instructed me to read this document exactly as it is written, with no interruptions. Marjorie adjusted the diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist. Let's just get on with it. Harrison, the traffic back to Connecticut is going to be awful. Sullivan adjusted his reading glasses. Very well. I, Arthur William Gallagher, being of sound mind and deeply disappointed spirit, do hereby divide my earthly possessions among those who have survived me. Beatrice felt a lump rise in her throat at her grandfather's bitter but completely true opening words. To my eldest daughter, Marjorie Gallagher Smay, I leave the primary estate in Newport, Rhode Island, along with all furnishings inside it, valued at about $4.2 million. May the large empty halls give you the echo chamber you have always wanted. Marjorie's face twitched at the insult, but hearing about the $4 million estate quickly smoothed out her frown. She shot a proud sideways glance at her brother. To my son, Charles Gallagher, Sullivan continued, I leave all my liquid assets, including the investment portfolios managed by Vanguard, totaling $6.8 million. You have always measured a man's worth by his bank account, Charles. Now you finally have one to match your ego. Charles did not even blink. He simply steepled his fingers, a faint, pleased smile playing on his lips. To my grandson, Bradley Smay, I leave my collection of restored vintage automobiles kept in the second garage. Drive them into the ground, as you do with most of your responsibilities. Bradley laughed out loud, completely missing the insult. Sweet, the '67 Shelby is finally mine. Beatrice looked down at her hands, her heart sinking. Not because she wanted millions. She truly did not. But because hearing her grandfather's bitter final words to his children proved how lonely his last years must have been. Clear as throat, they had circled him like vultures, and now they were feasting. And finally, Sullivan's voice softened almost without showing it as he turned the page, to my granddaughter Beatrice Gallagher, the only one who ever visited me without asking for a check, the only one who loved the dust of my workshop more than the shine of my checkbook. The room went completely still. Marjorie stiffened. Charles leaned forward. Even Bradley put his phone down. Was Arthur about to reveal a hidden trust fund? A secret offshore account? Sullivan took a deep breath. To Beatrice, I leave the 19th century mahogany writing desk, currently located in the corner of my study. Silence hung in the air for a split second before Marjorie let out a sharp, mocking burst of laughter. A desk? Marjorie gasped, bringing a manicured hand to her chest. "He left you a piece of junk furniture?" Charles shook his head, a cruel smirk spreading across his face. "Unbelievable. All those weekends you spent playing a loving granddaughter, making his tea and listening to his rambling stories. And he leaves you a termite motel. It's not junk," Beatrice said quietly, her voice shaking but firm. "It was his favorite desk. He restored himself." "Oh, honey," Marjorie said, her voice dripping with poisonous pity. "It's firewood. The estate liquidators were going to throw it in the dumpster. But by all means, if you want to drag that monster back to your little shoebox apartment, be my guest. I guess you can use it to sort your library overdue notices." Bradley snickered. "Want me to strap it to the roof of my new Shelby? I wouldn't want to scratch the paint, though." Beatrice felt the heat of humiliation creeping up her neck, but she refused to cry in front of them. She looked at Harrison Sullivan. "Is that all, Mr. Sullivan?" "That is the full physical and financial distribution, Miss Gallagher," the lawyer replied, looking at her with an expression she could not quite understand. "Was it pity or something else? The desk will be delivered to your home by the end of the week, courtesy of the estate." "Thank you," Beatrice said. Standing up, she grabbed her worn wool coat without saying another word to her aunt, uncle, or cousin. She walked out of the office, the sound of Marjorie's lingering, mocking laughter ringing in her ears. Let them have the millions. She had a piece of her grandfather's heart. But as she stepped out into Boston rain, Beatrice had absolutely no idea that the piece of firewood she had just inherited was about to turn her family's newly won empires to ash. Write helpful in the comments if you watched attentively. For days later, two burly movers forced a massive dark mahogany desk through the narrow doorway of Beatrice's third-floor walk-up apartment in Somerville. It was a tight fit. The desk was a beast. A heavy, imposing Victorian-era Davenport with a slanted writing surface, 8 heavy side drawers, and a raised back decorated with detailed hand-carved ivy patterns. "Where do you want it, lady?" One of the movers grunted, sweat pouring down his face. "Just right there by the window, please," Beatrice said, quickly moving a wilted pothose plant to make space. When the movers left, Beatrice stood alone in her living room. The desk looked strangely out of place among her IKEA furniture and second-hand thrift store finds. It smelled faintly of lemon oil, old paper, and the clear, comforting scent of her grandfather's cherrywood pipe tobacco. She ran her fingers over the slanted writing surface. The leather inlay was cracked and peeling at the edges. Marjorie was right about one thing. It was battered. There were deep gouges on the legs, and the brass handles on the drawers were tarnished green with age. But to Beatrice, it was beautiful. It was the desk where Arthur used to sketch his antique clock restorations. It was where he had taught her how to identify wood grain when she was 10 years old. "Okay, Grandpa," she whispered to the empty room. "Let's get you cleaned up." She spent the whole Saturday afternoon carefully cleaning the piece. She bought special wood soap, brass polish, and a stack of microfiber cloths. She emptied her grandfather's old dried-up inkwells and threw away a few loose rusty paper clips left in the top drawer. As she pulled out the bottom right drawer to polish the brass handle, it stuck. Beatrice wiggled it. The drawer was jammed halfway out. She pulled harder, but the old would groan in protest. Frowning, she knelt on the hardwood floor and grabbed a flashlight from her kitchen drawer. She shined the beam into the dark space where the drawer was supposed to slide. Far in the back, stuck against a wooden runner, was a small wedge-shaped piece of wood. It looked like it had splintered off the back panel. Beatrice reached her arm deep into the opening, her shoulder pressing against the dusty frame of the desk. Her fingers brushed the wedge. She pushed hard to loosen it. Click. It was not a splinter. The sound was sharp and metallic, echoing loudly inside the hollow belly of the desk. Beatrice pulled her arm out, startled. Then, with a soft whirring sound of old gears grinding to life, the whole decorative carved backboard of the desk, the piece with the detailed ivy patterns that sat above the writing surface, shifted. Beatrice stumbled backward, her heart pounding against her ribs. Slowly, smoothly, a wooden panel simply slid downward and disappeared into the body of the desk. Where solid mahogany had been a second ago, there was now a wide rectangular opening about the size of a large shoebox. Beatrice stared at it, her mouth completely dry, Her grandfather had always loved mechanical things, clocks, and puzzles. He had built a secret compartment. Her hands shaking, she slowly reached into the dark hidden space. Her fingers touched the soft, dusty surface of a velvet bag. Next to it was a thick, heavy bundle wrapped in oilcloth and tied with a leather cord, and finally a thick manila envelope sealed with red wax. She pulled everything out and laid it carefully on the cracked leather writing surface of the desk. First, she opened the velvet bag. Inside, shining under the harsh light of her apartment lamp, were 4 incredibly heavy solid gold bars. Beatrice gasped, nearly dropping the one she picked up. They were small, but their weight was shocking. Stamped into the metal were Swiss bank markings. "Oh my God," Beatrice breathed. Next, she untied the leather cord on the oilcloth bundle. Inside was a ledger. It was very old, bound in cracked black leather. She opened it. The pages were filled with her grandfather's neat, architect-like handwriting, but it was not a diary. It was a financial record, rows and rows of numbers, dates going back to the late 1970s, and names. But it was the names that made her blood turn cold. Charles Gallagher, Cayman. Accounts. Undisclosed transfers. Marjorie Smay. Embezzlement from Gallagher Corp. Forged signatures. Beatrice began reading the notes written in the margins. Her grandfather had been tracking them for decades. Charles and Marjorie were not just greedy heirs waiting for him to die. They had been stealing from the family business for 30 years. Charles had funneled millions into offshore accounts, dodging federal taxes, while Marjorie had forged Arthur's signature to use estate properties for her own personal loans. They were criminals, federal criminals, and Arthur had recorded every single stolen dollar. Right? Yes, if you want more of this content. Her hands shaking violently now, Beatrice broke the red wax seal on the final manila envelope. Inside was a single sheet of heavy parchment, a letter written in her grandfather's steady hand, dated just 3 weeks before his death. "My dearest Beatrice, if you are reading this, it means you remember what I taught you about looking beneath the surface, and it means those vultures have taken the bait. For years, I watched my own children slowly tear apart the legacy I built, stealing from me and covering their tracks with lies. I could have turned them into the authorities, but the scandal would have ruined the Gallagher name, and honestly, I was too ashamed that I had raised 2 thieves. But I could not let them win in the end. The millions I left them in the public will, that is only the surface money, the heavily taxed, highly visible assets, the true wealth of the Gallagher family, the antique equity, the Swiss reserves, and the bearer bonds were quietly liquidated and moved away from their grabbing hands. Inside this envelope is a safe deposit key for the Geneva Federal Bank and a series of account numbers. The gold in this desk is only for your immediate travel expenses. The accounts hold about $42 million. It is completely legal, unreachable by Charles, and completely yours. But more importantly, my brave girl, you now have the ledger. You hold the proof of their decades of federal fraud, tax evasion, and embezzlement. Marjorie and Charles believe they have won. They believe they have thrown you away with a piece of junk wood. I leave it to you to decide how to use this ledger. You can burn it and live your life in peace with your new fortune. Or you can show them exactly what kind of fire my firewood can make. I love you. Be Grandpa. Beatrice slowly lowered the letter. The apartment was dead silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator. She thought about Marjorie's mocking laughter. She thought about Charles's cold, cruel smirk. She thought about the years they had spent emotionally tormenting her grandfather, isolating him, waiting for him to die so they could feed on his bones. They thought she was weak. They thought she was a naive little librarian who would quietly run away with her scraps. A slow, dangerous smile spread across Beatrice's face. She picked up her cell phone and dialed a number. Harrison Sullivan's office. The receptionist answered. "Hi," Beatrice said, her voice completely steady, with none of the timid girl from the reading of the will left in it. "This is Beatrice Gallagher. I need to schedule an urgent meeting with Mr. Sullivan, and please tell him to contact my Uncle Charles and Aunt Marjorie. They are going to want to be there." The following Tuesday morning, the feeling in Harrison Sullivan's conference room was completely different from the gloomy, rain-soaked reading of the will. Sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting sharp, unforgiving shadows across the mahogany table. Beatrice arrived 10 minutes early. She was not wearing her oversized frayed wool coat this time. She wore a tailored navy blue blazer she had found at a vintage boutique, paired with a crisp white blouse. She sat exactly where her grandfather used to sit at the head of the table, her posture straight, her hands folded neatly over a thick oilcloth bundle. At exactly 10 o'clock, the heavy oak door swung open. Marjorie swept into the room, a storm of expensive perfume and deep irritation, followed by Bradley, who was already buried in his phone. Charles came in a moment later with a young, aggressive-looking corporate attorney, carrying a slim leather briefcase. "This is highly irregular, Harrison." Charles barked before he even sat down. "I had to postpone a board meeting for this. If Beatrice is trying to contest the will, because she has buyer's regret over a pile of kindling, I will have my counsel file a motion for harassment before lunchtime." Marjorie sighed loudly, dropping her Hermes Birkin bag onto an empty chair. "Really, Beatrice, we all grieve in our own way. But dragging us back here is just pathetic. The estate is settled. I've already hired interior decorators for the Newport house. You can't undo what's done just because you feel insulted." Beatrice did not flinch. She did not shrink into a chair the way she had 5 days earlier. She only watched them. She watched the proud set of her uncle's jaw and the dismissive roll of her aunt's eyes. Harrison Sullivan took his seat beside Beatrice, looking somewhat confused himself. "As I told you on the phone, Charles, Beatrice requested this meeting because of new material evidence concerning Arthur's estate." "Evidence of what?" Bradley scoffed without looking up from his screen. "Termites." Beatrice calmly untied the leather cord of the oilcloth bundle. The soft thump of the heavy black ledger hitting the polished wood of the conference table silenced the room. "Evidence," Beatrice said, her voice clear, strong, and perfectly steady, "of 32 years of corporate embezzlement, federal tax evasion, and wire fraud. Share this video with anyone who needs this information." The silence in the room became complete, the kind of heavy, choking silence that comes after thunder. Charles's eyes jumped to the black book. A muscle in his jaw twitched. "What is that?" he demanded, his voice dropping lower, losing its force. "This." Beatrice opened the cover, the old spine cracking softly. "Is Grandpa's personal ledger. He was a careful man, Uncle Charles. You always mocked him for spending so much time in his workshop, fixing old clocks and writing at his desk. You thought he was going senile. In truth, he was auditing you." Beatrice turned to a page marked with a small red sticky note. She did not look down at it. She looked right into Charles's eyes. "October 14th, 2014. $2.4 million diverted from the Gallagher Court Pension Fund into a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands under the name Argus Holdings, a company of which you, Charles, are the sole beneficiary." Charles's face lost all its color. His corporate attorney suddenly sat up straight, his pen frozen above his legal pad. That's absurd," Charles stammered, though a thin layer of sweat had suddenly appeared on his forehead. "Those are the ravings of a dying old man. It proves nothing." "Are you sure about that?" Harrison Sullivan cut in, his legal instincts now razor-sharp. He leaned over, adjusting his glasses to study the ledger. Arthur was a genius with numbers. If he wrote it down, he followed the routing numbers. "He did," Beatrice confirmed, turning the book so the lawyer could see. "Routing numbers, swift codes, dates, and forged authorization signatures. Which brings me to you, Aunt Marjorie." Marjorie let out a shaky, nervous laugh, clutching the lapels of her jacket. "Don't be ridiculous, Beatrice. I have nothing to do with Charles's business dealings. I am an art patron." Beatrice flipped to the back half of the ledger. "March 2nd, 2019. You used the secondary commercial properties owned by Gallagher Estates in Manhattan to get a personal line of credit for $6 million. You forged Grandpa's signature on the guarantor papers. He tracked the notary you bribed in Tribeca, Marjorie. He even kept the receipts of the wire transfers you used to pay the bribe. You little liar," Marjorie shrieked, her perfectly polished mask shattering into a million pieces. She lunged forward as if to grab the book, but Sullivan quickly placed his hand flat over pages. "I strongly advise you to stay seated, Marjorie," Sullivan warned, his voice like cracking ice. "If these documents are real, And knowing Arthur's handwriting as I do, you are both facing decades in federal prison. Bradley finally put his phone down. He cleared his throat, looked at his mother, then at his uncle, his eyes wide with growing terror. Mom, is she telling the truth? Marjorie could not answer. She was hyperventilating, staring at the black leather book as if it were a poisonous snake coiled on the table. Charles's lawyer snapped his briefcase shut and stood up. Mr. Gallagher, I must formally advise you that I cannot represent you in matters of federal criminal fraud without a separate retainer, and I strongly suggest that you do not say another word in this room. With that, the young lawyer practically ran out the door, leaving his wealthy client behind. You set us up, Charles hissed, his hand shaking as he gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. That old bastard set us up from the grave. No, Beatrice corrected softly. You set yourselves up when you decided your greed mattered more than your family. He just made sure you could not run away with the prize. The power in the room had completely flipped in only 5 minutes. Charles, the ruthless corporate liquidator, looked like a trapped animal. Clear his throat. Marjorie was openly crying, her mascara running in dark streaks down her face. So what do you want, Beatrice? Charles sneered, trying desperately to grab back a tiny piece of control. You want a cut? Is that it? You want me to wire you $5 million to burn the book? Fine. I'll make the transfer today. You take your extortion money and disappear. Beatrice let out a soft, real laugh. It sounded strangely like Arthur's. You still don't get it, Uncle Charles. I don't want your money, especially stolen money. She reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out the thick red wax-sealed envelope her grandfather had left her. She placed it beside the ledger. When Grandpa died, he left you the houses, the cars, and the domestic investment portfolios. What you did not realize is that those assets are now poisoned. Beatrice slid a single sheet of paper from the envelope across the table. 3 weeks before he died, Grandpa sent a copy of this ledger to the Internal Revenue Service and the SEC. By tomorrow morning, every domestic asset tied to the Gallagher name, including your new Vanguard portfolios and your Newport state, is going to be frozen pending a huge federal audit. Charles gasped, clutching his chest. Marjorie let out a pathetic wail. He left you the bait, Beatrice said coldly, and you swallowed it whole. You have no money, Charles. The millions you inherited are about to be taken by the federal government to pay back the taxes and penalties you owe. And you, Charles spat, his eyes bloodshot. You get nothing. You're a broke librarian. Not exactly, Harrison Sullivan said, reading the document Beatrice had handed him. The old lawyer looked up, a rare, brilliant smile breaking across his stern face. Arthur liquidated his private, untraceable bearer bonds and antique equity over the last 5 years. He moved it all into a secure private account in Geneva. Sullivan looked at Beatrice with deep respect. $42 million, left fully and legally to Beatrice. Bradley let out a low whistle. Damn, Beatrice, you played us. I didn't play anyone, Beatrice said, standing from a chair. She looked down at the 2 people who had made her grandfather's final years miserable. Here are your choices. Option A, you walk out of here, and I hand this original ledger to the FBI field office in Boston. You will both be indicted by the end of the week. You will lose the properties, the cars, the money, and your freedom. Marjorie sobbed into her hands. Please, Beatrice, please. I'm your aunt. Option B, Beatrice continued, ignoring the plea. You sign over your controlling shares of Gallagher Corp to me. Right here, right now. You give up your seats on the board. You walk away with the physical properties you inherited, the houses and cars, and you figure out how to pay the IRS with whatever is left in your couch cushions. But you will never step inside the company again, and you will never speak my name. Right? I learned in the comments if you learn something new. Charles glared at her, pure hatred burning in his eyes. He was a man who had spent his life crushing competitors, and now he was being taken apart by a 26-year-old girl with a library card. If we sign the shares over, Charles whispered hoarsely, you give us the ledger. I keep the ledger, Beatrice answered at once. As insurance. As long as you stay away from the company and quietly settle your debts with the IRS, the ledger stays locked in a vault. If you ever try to sue me, or if you ever try to get revenge, I mail it to the feds. I hold the leash now, Uncle Charles." The silence returned, broken only by the sound of rain, beginning to tap against the glass outside. Charles looked at the heavy black book. He looked at the legal document describing his coming financial ruin. He had no moves left. It was checkmate. Defeated, Charles sank into his chair. "Draft the transfer papers, Harrison," he muttered bitterly. Marjorie nodded wildly through her tears. "Yes, draft them. We'll sign. We'll sign anything." An hour later, the ink was dry. Beatrice Gallagher was the sole controlling shareholder of the Gallagher corporate empire, backed by $42 million in untraceable clean capital. Charles, Marjorie, and Bradley left the office in complete silence, stepping out into the rain with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the terrifying shadow of the IRS hanging over them. Beatrice stood by the window, watching them climb into their cars and drive away. A deep sense of peace washed over her. "You know, Beatrice," Harrison Sullivan said gently as he packed the newly signed contracts into his briefcase, "your grandfather always told me you were the smartest person in the family. I just didn't realize how right he was." Beatrice smiled, gently tracing the gold letters stamped on the cover of the black ledger. "He was a great teacher, Mr. Sullivan. He taught me that true value is not always obvious on the surface." Weeks later, Beatrice sat in a huge top-floor executive suite of Gallagher Corporation. The room had been completely redesigned, stripped of Charles's cold modern steel and glass. In the center of the room, placed perfectly to catch the morning light, was a battered 19th century mahogany desk. The secret compartment was closed, the wood polished to a rich, warm shine. She ran her hand lovingly over the cracked leather writing surface. They had mocked her tiny inheritance. They had laughed at the old man's junk. But as Beatrice opened the top drawer and pulled out a fresh file to begin her new work, she knew the truth. Her grandfather had not just left her a desk. He had left her an empire. Did Beatrice's final revenge satisfy you? Sometimes the greatest treasures are hidden in the places people overlook the most. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Also, write in the comments which country you're watching from so you can receive all our new content.